All right, so you should be able to see the Prezi screen at the moment. So I'll just introduce myself. My name is Stephen Colbran, and I am the head of the law discipline at the University of Central Queensland. And essentially my law school, if I can put it that way, is embedded within a business and law program. Okay, so I'll just start the Prezi, and just to explain very briefly the nature of my university. We have 14 campuses which are spread across 4 different states. The main clustering is in Queensland, and the main campus is in Rockhampton, which is in the central region of Queensland. So it's basically a regional university. Having said that, I actually don't have an office on any campus. Most of my staff don't have offices on any campus, and indeed some of my staff, at the moment I've got one in Germany, another one in New Zealand, and some of them are spread around in different states. Most people tend to work from home rather than getting an office on any particular campus, and I certainly work from home. In relation to the Australian law schools, there is 37 of them, one of which is private. I just ask you to mute your microphone if you wouldn't mind, so that we just don't get any feedback. And if you'd like to ask a question, just unmute it and ask at any time. So anyway, in Australia, it's only a relatively small country. There's a population of around about 20 million people. So we have quite a lot of law schools. Our law school is a bit different. It came about because there was a need to service regional and remote areas with a legal education, so that what we were finding is that practitioners in those areas were struggling to attract new staff. If they managed to attract staff from metropolitan areas, they only tended to stay for a very short time frame. And really what they were after were people who would get their legal education but were from that regional area, because they had all of their family connections there and they would tend to stay in those areas. So one way in order to achieve that is to provide a program that can deliver those services to rural, regional, remote areas. And it's also a lot less expensive for a student to participate in an online program than it is to travel and live in a capital city for typically 4 years for the duration of their law degree. So that was the underlying rationale of it. But what we've found is that it also attracts people who want flexibility. So people who usually are already in employment, or who have home care duties, looking after children. They're thinking about having a different career. So the flexibility of this online program really suits those students. So our typical student cohort consists of mature age students. Many of them already have a degree, an undergraduate degree. So their ages tend to be around about 30 years upwards. We also have some school leavers. So these will be 17, 18-year-olds in the mix as well, although they're a very small percentage. Okay, so that's the sort of background. The other aspect about the Australian law school situation is that there's quite extensive quality assurance regimes in Australia. So we have a national regulator named TEXA, and TEXA has developed some threshold learning standards and requirements in relation to law. And there are also the requirements which are prescribed by the accreditation authorities in each state. And they also have a national advisory board known as LAC, the Law Admissions Consultative Committee, which reports to all of the Chief Justices in Australia. So as well as that, we've got our usual graduate attributes required by our university, and then any other requirements that we might want to place on our students as they go through the course. So there's quite a lot of mapping involved with those processes, and I'll show you how that looks a little bit later. Okay, Just moving on. Ken, if you wouldn't mind just muting your microphone, you can do that at the bottom of the screen. Okay. Just right at the bottom of, if you move your mouse to the bottom of the screen, you should be able to see a microphone. If you just click that, it should put a line through it indicating it's muted. Okay, well, while Ken's trying to do that, we'll move on. I put on the screen there the title of a Bob Dylan song, Times Are Changing. I usually play that, but I'm just trying to keep the session short for the moment. Oh, and by the way, I hope you can understand my accent. I was in a shopping centre here in Porter Square, and there was a young girl, she must have been about 5, who looked over to her mother and said, "That man talks funny." So I think, so I hope you can understand me. The reason I put times are changing there is that really times are changing. In the photo that's depicted there, in the Bob Dylan YouTube clip, if you have a chance to look at it, it shows some early classrooms where students are writing on slates, and then it moves right through to this sort of picture, which shows students sitting in a classroom with all of their computers. But I think really, at least from my context, we're now moving beyond this picture to where these students are actually sitting at home. So if we just run through and have a look at the nature of these students, I've put up this probably well-worn term of digital natives, but what we find is that a lot of our educational systems are designed for mass education. They're really designed in the industrial age. So often, at least in the Australian context, I don't want to preface what the American context is, as I don't know enough about it, but at least in our context, we have a lot of oral lectures. And these don't really fit well with students. Students these days like to have recorded lectures, and they like to look at them when and where they want to in their own time frames, because they tend to time shift if they can. So if you start, for example, podcasting lectures or recording lectures and put them up on your learning management system, what typically happens is that you'll see a decline in attendance in lectures, physical lectures. And the reason is that students, it's not that they don't value those lectures, it's just that they want to be able to control their lifestyle and times. So they're also technologically savvy, and they do expect academics to be that way as well. And not all academics are that way. And, you know, people of my generation and older don't tend to be that technologically savvy. So it creates a bit of an issue with dealing with students who expect that in their education. The other aspect of them is that they adjust rapidly to technological change. I've noticed my students really adapt to using Zoom, this particular technology, and other technologies that we're developing, which I'll show you later as well. And not only just viewing them, but actually creating bits of software as well. The other aspect of it is that they're quite keen on social media networking. So I suspect it's the same with your students. So there will be Facebook sites set up for your subjects, whether you know about them or otherwise. I did a study with secondary school students in Australia, and one of the comments that was made was that at that time they were using MySpace, and MySpace wasn't your space. So in other words, what they're saying is that the social media networking side of things really is their space. So they'll use Facebook in their class, even though you mightn't be invited to it. And that creates a whole lot of policy issues as well. What happens, for example, when a student is deleted from a Facebook account? They can't access the rest of the class. And I've had that problem come to me as a Deputy Dean Learning and Teaching, and the approach my university has taken to that is to say, well, that's not part of our delivery system. We use our learning management system. We don't control Facebook, so that is something entirely separate. I'm not sure that's actually the right way to deal with this particular issue, but that's an example of the sorts of issues. And I would have thought you would be encountering those sorts of things as well. The other thing about our students is they're looking for collaborative learning experiences. They want to be mobile, and they want, above all, convenience and control of their time. Also, jurisdictional borders become pretty well meaningless. So we have students all over Australia, some overseas as well. And I find they're quite creative. particularly our mature age ones, they're much more questioning than, for example, school leavers would be. So there's a whole range of issues associated with the changing nature of the student body. This is a particular quote that comes from some quite good authors, actually. And what they're saying is that in our internet age, it's possible for us to rethink the architecture of legal education along transformative lines, use new materials of digital learning to prepare our students not only for the globalised world of professional practice they're about to enter, but the avalanche of knowledge that awaits them in our technological century. And I think that's a very accurate statement. The other thing I wanted to mention is really to try and debunk this myth that sometimes arises that somehow online legal education is second-rate compared to a face-to-face delivery of legal education. And what I usually refer to is this US Department of Education evaluation, which they did a meta-study of, I think it was about 1,000 papers going back from 1996 onwards. So they were looking at good quality methodology, and they basically found that on average that the online learning conditions perform slightly better than face-to-face institutions. Now, I think the reality is you can have good online education and you can have bad online education. You can have good face-to-face programs and you can have bad ones, and there's everything in between. And mixed mode is a very good approach, which I'm glad to hear that you're about to launch that approach and have online mixed with attended schools. That works quite well. So I ran a law school that had that approach for nearly 9 years, and it works quite well. Okay, so if we move on, I put this slide in particular for the Dean because I thought he might be interested in this. This is how the CQU Law Program has grown since its inception in 2011. So the graph on the left is FCEL, that is equivalent full-time student load. You've got to remember that most of my students are part-time, so that's just a graph of the equivalent if they were full-time. So you can see that there's quite a rapid growth in this, what is a very small law program. We only have about, we have eight permanent staff, and we utilise a number of professional practitioners as well to assist us. But you can see the growth rate in this particular program. So it does certainly suit our market niche. Okay, all right, I'll move on. Some of the advantages and disadvantages of going online. So just briefly, the main advantages, at least from the student's perspective, is flexible delivery of content across multiple platforms. So that when you're designing your program, you need to make sure that you're delivering it in a way that your students can use it on multiple devices, particularly mobile devices. So things like iPads, Android tablets, phones, mobile phones, smartphones, and also laptops and other types of computers. So you need to give serious consideration as to the way in which you're delivering those programs to suit multiple devices. What we did in our program was we set it up in such a way that students could use iPads. So we've created the entire program on iTunes U, which is publicly accessible, and you can look at that at any time. All of our content and materials are publicly accessible. We even gave our students iPads so that they would have those to use in the program. We also delivered it through Moodle, which is our learning management system, so they can use their normal computers to access that through normal web browsers. So we're basically catering for the diversity of types of equipment that the students will have. So that's in terms of flexible delivery. It also benefits overseas, remote, regional, rural regional students as well. So it gives them an opportunity to participate in programs that they mightn't otherwise be able to access because they can't afford to, or because they're tied down in some way with family commitments, other work commitments, etc. It does engender in our students advanced understandings of communication technologies, so they become much more adept at using these sorts of things, which is going to become very important to them in practice. So if you look at the type of work of Suskin, tomorrow's lawyers, for example. All of these sorts of experiences are going to be very valuable for them when they actually get out into the workplace. Our students have employer career responsibilities, and quite a lot of them actually come from low socioeconomic backgrounds as well. Many of them are first in their family to go to university, and it offers them an experience they wouldn't otherwise necessarily have available to them. There are some major disadvantages, though. One of them is this feeling of isolation that can occur if a student is operating by themselves at home. If you don't build into your program ways in which they can interact with other students, or find students doing the same course in their area in which they can meet, for example, then you run into these issues of isolation. And there's also issues with law students generally and medical students as well, dealing with depression and those sorts of mental illnesses. So you need to be very conscious about the nature of your student body and the type of experience you're delivering. And if you find a student who's got an issue with that, then you've got to direct them to the appropriate counselling services and what have you. But the main thing is to build up a community of practice community scholars within the program. The other perhaps disadvantage is if you're dealing with students who are school leavers, and if they really want an experience that involves them mixing with other people of their own age, this isn't really the type of course for them. It's really more designed for mature age students. So what we're finding is that our school leavers can effectively do the degree, but I always worry about them in terms of their level of maturity compared with the rest of the student body. But they do pass, they do seem to cope. And they do actually benefit from the life experiences of the other people in the class. So there's pros and cons with that type of experience. Another aspect is the absence of non-verbal communication. So if you're running a program that is based primarily around having discussion threads on a learning management system, then you don't have the type of communication we're looking at now. So that's why I've insisted in our program that we run Zoom sessions or Blackboard Collaborate sessions weekly for all of our students. Okay. Not all students actually attend those sessions. We don't make it mandatory, and the reason why we don't make it mandatory is because of the nature of the student body. If we start to set specific times when those classes are on and make it mandatory for attendance, we then start to lose students because you lose the flexibility. So how we get around that is to actually record the sessions and also have multiple sessions during the week. And we tend to run them during the evening when these students, if they're working, then they can attend during the evening. If they've got small children, for example, the children go to bed, they can attend during, a class at 8 o'clock at night. So it does mean you need flexibility in the way in which the way in which you present your academic program, and needs flexibility with your academic staff as to when they're teaching. Another negative or a positive, depending on how you look at it, is that it requires greater self-reliance by the student body. We can motivate them through having live sessions, but at the end of the day, I suppose it's like anything, it comes down to the self-reliance of those students. Are they sufficiently motivated to complete the program? What we find is that we generally have higher attrition rates than you would typically see. I suspect, having spoken to people at some of the other American law schools, we would have higher attrition rates than you would see in those schools. And that's really because of the nature of the self-reliance and the other compounding factors on these students' lives, competing factors. All right, just going on. I think there's 4 stages of online delivery, so I think we'll run through these. The first one is having an online repository and distribution of content. So what we've done at this stage in our particular program is that we use Google Docs as a repository for all of our course materials that staff develop. The advantage of putting it in the cloud in something like Google Docs is that it doesn't cost us anything. It's properly backed up. And, for example, if a staff member's computer blows up or they leave or get hit by a bus or whatever else could potentially happen, we have all of the course materials in a repository. And what we have is a workflow that demands that if a staff member is going to update their materials, then what they'll do is they will pull down the latest version from the repository. If it's a Word document, for example, they'll do track changes, and then they'll upload the next version with an accretion in the versioning number. So you can see here that we have a repository for Word documents, or notes which are Word documents, for iBooks, for podcasts, for PowerPoints, any readings, tutorial answers and questions and answers, and any other course-related material. And that way we've got a repository. We can check the copyrights for any of the online material or pictures or images that we might want to use. I'm just showing you quickly here the actual notes repository, and just to point out a couple of things here. We tend to keep our notes in Word, and you'll notice that they have a naming convention, so it'll have the subject name underscore the week, so 06 would mean week 6. The title of that week's work, and then it has a version number. And it'll also have a little E after it, which means that it's edited. We actually hire an editor to edit all of our materials, make sure there's no spelling errors, the grammar's correct, and all of the links work, so that our materials are up to date. And it's good for a person like me who goes in and checks that our materials are current. So I quite often go through and look at all of this course material for currency, for accuracy, presentation standards, those sorts of things. So it's a fairly regimented approach. It doesn't restrict academic freedom, I don't believe, in any way. I'm not telling the academics what content they have to put in their courses, but I am mandating that they be presented in a certain way. And you'll have a look at those later, but not what's in the courses. Okay, so that was stage 1. Stage 2 is the use of a learning management system to distribute content, and also minor use of discussion forums and chats and wikis. So we use Moodle, which is a open source learning management system. A lot of universities use Blackboard, and there's quite a range of these learning management systems. But the basic idea is that it's a type of repository with added types of features. Generally, the way in which I structure these particular sessions is that every week I'll change the message to indicate what week of the course the students are in. It'll also indicate the learning objectives for that week, and it'll also have the content, which will be the notes, the podcasts, and also any movies that we might have. And I'll also put in links to YouTube films of the live session. So all of that is there every week. And there's a lot of activity in the discussion threads, because we tend to have at least typically about 10% of the marks or assessment is related to class participation on the discussion forum, on Zoom sessions, or on both. And we produce a rubric so students are very clear on how they're actually assessed. There's some other tactics we use to try and build up a community of practice as well, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. This is an example from another university. This is Charles Darwin University. This is a bit of a different approach. And you can see here that it doesn't have structured weeks, but what it does, it's actually designed around, in this particular case, try to build research capabilities for the students. So it's a different sort of design. Okay, but again, it's building this community of practice. So we go to stage 3, even more so is construction of learning communities, greater use of chat, quiz, wikis, blogs, and also starting to utilise content acquisition by the students, then starting to develop their own materials, and use of MOOCs. If you actually have a look at our material on iTunes U, they're very close to MOOCs. The only elements that we haven't really put into that is the discussion forum, open to the public at large. That capability is now present in iTunes U. It wasn't present last year when we developed all 26 of our courses. So we're now having a debate as to whether we open up our entire program as in effect, 26 MOOCs. Okay, I'll play this.
Okay, welcome everyone. What I asked you to do today was read the case of R and Con, which is a case from the Supreme Court of New South Wales, which relates to the ability of a spouse, de facto partner, parent, or child to object to giving evidence in a criminal trial against the defendant. And in R and Con, as you know, Mrs. Con, after giving a statement to the police on the night of the murder, and Mr. Con was charged with that murder, indicated that she would change her story if required to give evidence against Mr. Con in the trial.
Okay,
and
so I'll stop
trial,
that there.
The defense counsel indicated that Mrs. Con...
That's just an example of an online class from Charles Darwin Uni. That's how they run it using Blackboard Collaborate. What I'm showing you now is actually a more modern version of the site that I run. So this is a live class that's happening at the moment, and it has these features in it of trying to build the learning communities, and it's very structured. And what you'll see now as it's scrolling down, for each week of the course, you've got a brief summary, an introduction, the objectives. It then has an overview film, typically about 20 minutes, 10, 20 minutes.
Welcome to Laws 13017, Civil Procedure. Topic 1, Court Adjudication, Case Management and ADR. I'm Stephen Colbran. Before we get into Module 1, I want to make some general comments concerning civil procedure.
So it'll stop that. And then, so there's a brief introduction to the topic. Then you've got notes, podcasts, PowerPoints. Then you've got problem-based learning, each one having its own thread to try and keep the site very neat. We'll just play this one very quickly as well.
Welcome to Laws 13017, Civil Procedure.
Okay, so you see the basic structure of the site. And we tend to deliver all of that material for 12 weeks worth of material, 2 weeks before the course actually starts. So all of that content is available. So students, particularly our students, they like to start early if they can so that they can spread out the load throughout the particular term. So that means we have to be very organised to make sure all of our materials are ready. Sometimes that doesn't happen. We might, for example, have a new lecturer who's starting who wants to make changes to a course, and then the course will be delivered in stages. But most of our courses are delivered in advance and packaged in that way. So it's a fairly simple, straightforward site design of a learning management system. And it's consistent across all of our courses so that students have once they learn the pattern, it's very easy for them to do the next course. Okay, that's stage 3. Stage 4, this is where the learning management system's importance really starts to dwindle. It just becomes a node in a network of content. And this is really where we're starting to go now. So students can utilize things like blogs, portfolios, their own websites, things like WordPress websites, virtual world simulations, and a whole host of other sorts of things. Flashcards is another example of something that will now come into this space. And we're looking at semantic tags and how these things link together so that it's a stream of content and interactions that students can have with us and with each other. So we're just starting down this track. To give you an example of some of the things we've been playing with various game engines for developing virtual worlds. I'm a bit of in two minds about the success of this particular approach, but it's one we're certainly exploring. We've developed lots of software to train people in different aspects of the law. I used to teach trust, well, I still do teach trust accounting as part of our legal professional responsibility course, except that I actually don't teach it anymore because I wrote a computer program to teach it. And students actually find the computer program quite effective because it actually shows them how to do the accounting, and they actually have to do the accounting as well as the theory. And the beauty of this is that they can do it at their own pace, at their own time. If they've got any other questions, they can certainly ask me about it. And I do have some supplementary problems in the discussion forum. So I tend to focus more on the theory, whereas this tends to teach them more about the practical accounting, so that when they finish our course, they can understand how to do the trust accounting side of things. I find this is a much better approach because teaching people trust accounting generally is pretty boring. So it's hard to make it interesting. So I turned it into this. Okay, another short film.
Welcome back to Take 5. I'm Larry King.
David Letterman.
Have you ever thought about studying law? All that reading and how boring law might be? I know I have. But seriously, there is a new way to learn law, using animation and simulations. Here to talk about this is Professor Stephen Colbran from CQ University. Welcome, Professor.
Good to be here, Larry.
Tell us, Professor, how can you make law interesting to learn?
Larry, I thought I would show you some examples. I think the place to start is to figure out what not to do. Let's think about how can we make law extremely boring to learn. First, have lengthy lectures full of content presented in a monotone, just like this. Make sure students have endless cases and textbooks to read, endless PowerPoint slides full of text and bullet points. Make sure every assessment in every subject is a written assignment and supervised exam.
Doesn't sound like much fun. How do students react to this?
Not well, I am afraid, Larry. I thought, why not try something different? Take the case of Stuart, a solicitor being pursued by an overly interested Mrs. Robinson. Watch this animation in an ethics subject and think what you would do if you were in Stuart's position.
Don't be shy, Stuart. Sit down and relax. You know I like you. I would really like to get to know you better. How would I do that, Stuart?
I would run a mile.
Next, take the case of Mrs. Monk. While overly protective of her cats, she still wants to leave something in her will for her solicitor Stuart. Students need to help Stuart remember his ethics and professional duties.
Mrs. Monk, I'm glad to have you visit us again. How are you? Would you like a cup of tea?
I'm well, dear. No tea for me. It gives me gas. Let us get down to business. I want to make a will. Do you make wills here?
Yes, we do.
Good. I have cats. Lots of cats. I want to look after my cats.
Professor, how do you make a simple animation?
Larry, there are 4 steps. Ideas, script and characters, storyboard, animation, and finally distribution and review. They all work together as a type of action research project.
Can you explain what is involved in each step?
The aim is to make the teaching of law more visual. We should be using images and diagrams, animation and simulations as well as text. To demonstrate what I had in mind, I chose ethics as a focus as it has a wide variety of interesting stories. When searching for ideas, look for conflict, light and the dark side. Think of Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader as inspiration. Stories are a natural way for people to learn and remember. It is generally useful to adopt a 3-act structure. Act 1, beginning, setting the scene, 25% of the script. Act 2, confrontation, 50%. Act 3, resolution, 25% of the script.
Sounds like a Hollywood film.
It's the same design. Now looking at each of the elements, the script is where the ideas are expressed in a standard format. Each page of the script is 1 minute of screen time. The script expresses elements such as time and place where the scene takes place. Action is what is happening expressed in the present tense. Stage directions, in other words, what particular characters are doing or experiencing. Names of the characters and dialogue are also included. I constructed the raw characters from templates of South Park-style characters available on the internet. To get the students involved, you can set an assignment whereby the students actually write the script. It is all about engagement.
Tell us more about the characters you use.
Without characters, there is no story. It is better to have archetypes, universal characters, rather than stereotypes. The universal characters I have created had to have a history, personality, moods and traits. That's what makes them interesting.
How do you turn the written script into something visual?
Larry, I use storyboards. Storyboards translate the script into images. Once you have a clear plan, then you start the animation process. The animation was completed using Anime Studio Pro 9.5. The animations need to run on a variety of computers and mobile devices, phones and tablets.
Whoa, way too technical for me. What did students think about the animations?
They were impressed. Have a look at this chart. On a 5-point scale with 3 as neutral and 5 as strongly agree, students found the animation made the lesson more interesting to learn, helped them visualize the problem, remember the issues and generally assisted their learning. Animations do not have to be passive, they can be interactive. Have a look at Harry and the Blast Furnace. Branching structures can enable quite complex simulations. Better still, get students to write the script. Let them direct their own learning. You are only limited by your imagination.
Well, Professor, I have learned a lot about animations and how you teach law.
My pleasure, Larry.
Okay, I might ask, I think it's Leanne, if you wouldn't mind just muting your microphone. If you can do that, that would just cut down some of the feedback. I showed you that film just to indicate some of the simulation work we do. I think the most effective ones are the branching simulations, which I'll talk about a little bit later. It did depict there an example from civil procedure, which was looking at the issue of what we call disclosure. I think you probably call it discovery. And it really requires the students to go through and answer specific questions in the environment where they're dealing in, well, effectively a work environment where they've got a partner of a law firm who's interrogating them about whether particular documents should be discovered or not. So it can be quite realistic. I made one many years ago that was so realistic the students used to shake when they were doing it because it was very intense and it had time limits whereby a judge would ask a question, and if you didn't answer it appropriately, they got quite angry. They can be quite realistic, and it went right through and printed out a judgment depending on what choices they made. So you can create these things, or better still, get your students to create these types of things as a learning experience. All right, we'll move on. I thought we might have a look at a few specific issues that might be of interest to you.
All right, can we stop for a sec?
Yeah, sure.
Did you tell us what software you use to make those animations?
Yep, I will. I'll show you all the software that we use in a later slide, and you'll be able to access a copy of this Prezi as well. So you'll have all the details. You don't need to take any notes. Yeah, quite happy to share that. And at the moment, my son has actually developed a piece of software that helps you build these branching animations very easily without having to know JavaScript and all sorts of scripting languages. So there's other solutions to make it easier for academics to go down this path. And you don't have to use animations. You can use video, you can use still images and make it a comic sort of situation. There's a wide variety of things you can use in the branching animations. Okay, just looking at these specific issues, I think the first one is quality assurance. So let's have a brief look at that. I did mention earlier that there were multiple layers of accreditation. The top layer is really the Australian qualification standards. So these are requirements for types of degrees. So in our case, we're at AQF level 7 and 8. Level 7 is a bachelor's degree, level 8 is an honours degree. Above that, you start to get to level 9, which is master's, level 10, which is PhD. So as you can see, just broadly, there's a whole range of requirements to meet the AQF standards, which any Australian degree, bachelor's degree, has to meet. Then we have the standards that are required by the TEXA, the regulatory agency I mentioned earlier. There's quite a lot of those. Then we have the standards required for admission by the admission bodies in each state. And then we actually have the requirements for our university in terms of graduate attributes. So you can see that there's a lot of things that we actually have to comply with that students actually complete to get the degree at the end of the day. So how do we manage that? How do we do this? What we've done is we've mapped all of our subjects. So we don't look at a subject as an individual silo. I'd say to my staff, no one owns any particular subject. What we do is we're offering a degree program. We have to look across all of our subjects and work out how we're going to develop and meet these requirements progressively throughout the degree. So we need to map thoroughly where, for example, a particular skill, it might be a communication skill, and we might develop initial written communication in one subject, and we have basic, intermediate, advanced levels. And we stream that through the course, all of the courses, so that by the end of the day, we can be assured that our students have developed those, if it's a particular skill, that particular skill at the end. So it's all mapped, and it's also, you can see we've included the assessment practices in each particular course so that we know that we've got a diversity of assessment practices happening. And at any point in time, if our regulatory agency comes along and asks us, well, where do you meet the requirements for this particular aspect regulation. We can say we meet it in this subject, this subject, this subject. This is how we teach it. This is how we assess it. That means that if any of our staff members want to change any of the assessment in their subject, it has to come back to our general, what we call a law program committee, which then looks at whether the proposed assessment still meets the mapping requirements and all of our regulatory requirements. So it's not to say that staff can't change things. It just means that we have to look at our entire course in a global way, not in an individual silo. So that's mapped out for all of our 26 subjects. We also map out the assessment in terms of where they lie in the 12 weeks that the course spans. We do this so that we don't have any situations where, for example, first-year students have massive numbers of assessments falling at the same time. So what we're doing is spreading out their load, because we're very sensitive to the fact that our students are time poor. They need to have this assessment load spread out and so that they can cope with it. If we start piling things one on top of another, we get attrition because they can't tolerate that. And most students have that problem. It wouldn't matter if it's online or face-to-face. So what I hope you see from that is that we have a very thoroughly mapped program, and that any changes we make, we look at it across the whole program. So if there's a change in one subject, how does that impact on others? Okay. Just on the issue of assessment, I'd just like to mention that really, I don't think there's any form of summative or formative assessment that exists in a face-to-face environment that we can't duplicate online. People often say, well, you can't really do advocacy online, can you? Well, our courts certainly do. I know in Australia our High Court does, our Supreme Court does, and I know that we do. We run moots with the most recent one we ran. We had a judge in New Zealand. We had our 4 students actually arguing the moot. They were in various parts of Australia, and I managed the technology from Brisbane, which is the capital of the state of Colbran, and that worked perfectly well. We recorded the session, and then they could analyse the film as to their performance. So students can do oral advocacy, they can do presentations, they can work together, for example, on client interviewing exercises without any problems whatsoever using Zoom or equivalent type technology. We still do have invigilated exams, not in every subject. That really is the primary way of ensuring that it is actually the student who's doing the assessment. If you're just setting an assignment and letting students hand that in, there's always a risk that someone else has written the assignment. With invigilated exams, we can verify who the student is. With a lot of these online presentations, we can also, of course, verify who they are because we can see and hear them. Same with the moots. But with assignments, the written assignments, there's always a risk that someone else has done that. So, we can do negotiation, mediation, moots, advocacy, interactive seminars, collaborative drafting. All I mean by that is our students use Google Docs to jointly work on pleadings and other types of documents. And the only other aspect of this is that we also have fully automated processes for electronic submission and electronic marking of assessment, which I'll show you as well. So I'll just move on a little bit. This is an example of one of the pieces of software that we use for electronic marking. This is a system I developed that we use at the university. Essentially what happens is that students electronically submit their assessments, written type assessments, into the learning management system. This particular program is linked to the learning management system. It enables the person in charge of the subject to allocate marking electronically to anybody on the planet, as long as they've got an internet connection. Those markers can then download the student assessment. They can then mark it up either in text, video, audio, what have you, using rubrics if they want to. And you can also insert, as you can see at the bottom of that picture, there are spider charts which show the performance of this particular student on any of the relevant criteria as against the average performance of all other students. That marked up assessment, once it's been moderated, if you've got multiple markers in multiple locations, you want to conduct a moderation process. That's easily handled by this software. It does statistical as well as visual overlays of distributions from different markers. If you've got a concern about one particular marker, you can bring up their assessment and moderate that. You can also do pre-calibration marking, whereby you get a sample of student papers, all of the markers mark it, and we see if there's a difference in interpretation from the actual draft answer guide and marking guide. Once all of that's finalised and we're happy with moderation, we then release this to students. They get an email attaching their marked up PDF. So they get all the feedback, and it also automatically puts the marks into the learning management system. So there's no double entry of marks. And that's how it works. So it's a complete closed loop system. We had to do that because particularly at the former law school I worked at, it was much more isolated. It was in a fairly, much more regional area, if I can put it. It wasn't remote, but it was far more regional. And there weren't markers readily available in the small town to be able to do the marking. So we needed systems to be able to electronically shift marking anywhere and get it back and distribute it to students. We couldn't rely on post, it's too slow. This next screen shows you a new system that we're using for monitoring performance of students. So this is built on the Moodle. It's an add-on to the Moodle learning management system, but essentially what it does is it uses a set of parameters to determine whether the system thinks a student's at risk. So students which are at risk are shown in red, those that have issues are in yellow, those that are green we don't have any problems with. So the ones that are in red typically would have a low grade point average, failed a number of courses, and have very low participation or no participation in the learning management system. So they're flagged as red. The system then lets us nudge those students, so in the sense that we can send tailor-made emails to the student asking them why they're not participating and whether in fact they should continue their enrolment. So those 3 students, this is an actual course I'm running at the moment, those 3 students I sent that email to. One of them told me that they were participating using iTunes U and hadn't done anything on the Moodle site as yet. That's fine. So I suggested that they then start participating and interacting with other students on the discussion forum. The other 2 students, I didn't get a response. I've now requested that their enrolment be terminated in this particular course because they're not going to succeed. They're not engaging. So they may come back to me yet and argue a case to be reinstated, but there's no point in having them in a course if they're not participating. The other thing is they get charged about $1,600, which is the course fee, if they don't withdraw before the census date, the cut-off date. So I'd rather have them leave and not incur a debt. The university is quite comfortable with that approach, mind you. They do lose a little bit of income, but it's better to have students who are participating. Okay, this is how we handle clinical placements. We're in the process of setting up our own community legal centre. And what we're intending to do is to link into rural, regional and remote community legal centres and have our students using Zoom participate in client interviewing, research activities, creating perhaps apps that can be used for or used in these community legal centres. These centres are terribly underfunded, understaffed and have a large demand because generally the cost of employing lawyers is high, so you have quite a large demand from people who can't actually afford them. So what we're doing is looking at a way in which our students can interact using the internet with these centres in locations that are even more challenging than city-based locations. So that's our basic model. This is an example of a person in the towards the top left, that lady there, she actually runs a community legal centre in a regional area. And all of these other participants are our students. She's actually explaining what her community legal centre does, and these other students are looking at really participating in that centre. So this can be done online. It has its challenges. It's much easier to have a student go along to an existing community legal centre in a city. This is a bit more challenging, but it can be done. And we need to do it for our students to get those clinical experiences. Okay, internationalisation. We had a major report in Australia that was looking at how law schools should approach internationalisation. At the moment, very few do. We came up with a series of models of how that would work in our environment. This particular set of models is really teacher-centric rather than student-centric. So in other words, if you look at the one in the middle, this is a situation where you've got essentially us on one side, so you might have a teacher with a class of students, and they also might link into a what we call an access centre, where there mightn't be a teacher, but there might be a group of students sitting together. They can then link through the particular teacher or academic who's controlling that class to another academic anywhere on the planet controlling another class. So that's an example of a model. It's teacher-centric though. The teachers really control everything. Another example are more student-focused models. And if we look perhaps at the one on the right-hand side, which is the one that we tend to run with our classes, this is an individual distributed model. So we have people all over the place, both students and teachers and potential professional people who we might invite along to a class, and we're all participating. And what we're doing at the moment is an example of that. It's really, well, I suppose it's mostly that, except we have some places where we've got a few people gathered. So, there's different models, and I did this presentation for, was the 26 Chinese law deans who were looking at connecting with Australian law schools, and they were also connecting with American law schools as well. So the Chinese law schools are quite interested in doing this. It's perhaps a little bit easier for us because we're in a much more sympathetic, I'll put it that way, time zone, that you can do it. And it's something you should perhaps consider if you're not already doing it, just to broaden the international experience of your students. So that can be done online. Another thing that I've done is I've created a YouTube channel for my particular course. It's a way of locating all the particular films that are relevant to your particular courses in one location. So I manage a YouTube channel to do that, so students can know where to go and can look at all of that material. There are some important things you need to do with YouTube. One of them is to make sure you have proper meta tags. Meta tags are these things at the bottom here which search engines use to locate your particular resources. You need to have very good descriptions of what you're doing in your program, have links to Facebook pages, links back to your law school's web pages as well. Because these things can be seen by other people and they may want to inquire further about enrolment in a particular course. So it's as much about marketing as it is about education. I also have standardized thumbnails, so you can see that greeny sort of colored thing. That's the university's backgrounds that they like to use in PowerPoint presentations. I can use those for these types of films as well. And I'll probably put one on the front of this as well, once I get the film developed or created by Zoom. The other thing that you can't actually see there too clearly, but on the green standard template we use, it also has a notice about privacy. So this is saying that if you're joining in a Zoom session, that if you want to be, you don't want to be filmed, then either turn off your video camera and you can still participate and listen, or you can also turn off your microphone as well. So we don't mandate that people have to be in these Zoom classes, and we certainly don't mandate that they have to have a visual presence. So there's those sorts of issues to be conscious of, as well as whole issue of privacy. Okay, I'll move on. So once those films are prepared, uploaded to YouTube, I then embed them into the learning management system, and then they then appear. So when a student just needs to click once and they can view the film. And they can look at that on their mobile phone, on their computer at home or wherever, sitting in the learning management system. So they view that through their web browser. Okay, this is about iTunes U. I'll let this run.
This is the iPad desktop. Double-clicking, or single-clicking rather, on iTunes U opens up the list of subjects available on iTunes U at CQU University, and you can see that there are roughly 26 subjects. including a subject about studying law online. If we have a look at the structure of these subjects, we can select, for example, legal professional conduct. And you can see that the iBooks are set out with 4 tabs on the right-hand side: information, posts, notes, and materials. At the moment, we're showing the information tab. You have an overview of the particular subject, some information about the person running it, the list of topics dealt with in the particular subjects, the teaching methods employed, attribution in terms of who's constructed it, and then ultimately how to enroll for credit if you want to do so. In terms of posts, there are a collection of posts for each week of the course. Courses are generally 11 to 12 weeks in duration. And you can see that for each of the weeks, you have notes, podcasts, keynotes, and other sorts of information. In this example, in the first week, there's some information about trust accounting. So if we have a look at these notes, we'll have a look at the topic of conflicts of interest. So if we touch on the iBook for conflicts of interest, it will close existing iBooks that might be open and then open up that particular iBook. The way these iBooks are constructed is that you have a cover page, you have a set of objectives for this particular class, and that also includes information such as prescribed readings, glossaries. There's also an inbuilt glossary, which students can click on to get definitions of different terms and links to other things. iBooks can also contain animations. So, for example, we've included Mrs. Monk's will within this particular iBook.
Mrs. Monk, I'm glad to have you visit us again. How are you? Would you like a cup of tea?
I'm well, dear. No tea for me. It gives me gas.
And you can see there that the film can play, and then students can look at little hints as to the relevant rules that apply. Also, there are mini quizzes. So, for example, here, clear the answers. If I select the wrong answer, it'll show me, etc. So that's basically how the iBooks are constructed. At the end of the iBooks as well, there are review questions. So these are formative questions, so you can look at the question and then you can check the particular answer. There are also tutorial problems that have a direct link back into Moodle for discussion. So these are usually more lengthy problems, anywhere from 15 to 60 minutes worth of work for each problem. So if we just get out of this particular iBook and go back to iTunes U, we'll get out of this subject and we'll go into civil procedure. I just wanted to show you a branching structure, Harry and the Glass Furnace. So it's closing that iBook and it's opening up a new iBook. So this is basically an exercise to help students understand the rules in relation to disclosure, as it's known in Queensland, or discovery in other places. There's a flow chart describing the process for determining whether a document should be disclosed, or then there is an interactive exercise.
Julia, I have asked you to come and see me about the aluminium company case. We act on behalf of the company and get instructions from Harry Engel, the managing director. I have given you a copy of the claim.
Yes, Stuart. I got your email attaching the claim.
Just by way of summary.
So we'll just stop it there. He ultimately asks some questions and students have a choice of the answers at the bottom. So, for example, if the character or the particular student that who's looking at this has no idea, they make that...
Sorry, Stuart, but I have no idea.
You'll notice these things are designed to run on tablet devices, so there's tap to continue, but they can also run within web pages.
Come on, Julia. Have a look at the flow chart. You can work it out. What is the answer?
These types of scenarios can be used to run emulations of court scenes, to practice rules of evidence. All sorts of situations can be described. So that's then iTunes U. All of this is publicly available for anyone to look at. If people want to understand how to study law online, they can actually look at the manual that we've produced to enable people to become accustomed to learning in this particular way. And once again, this is available for anybody to see on the internet. It also fully explains iTunes U, audio podcasts which are available, as well as the equivalent keynotes or PowerPoint slides. And that's essentially iTunes U as law is taught by CQU.
Okay, so all of that material is publicly available. You can have a look at that at any time. I can manage all 26 subjects myself in the course manager on iTunes U. So it's not a situation where you have to have a massive commitment of staff. I'm reasonably adept at IT, but I'm not a programmer or anything like that, but I can certainly manage the construction of these iBooks myself. The only assistance I had in relation to actually constructing the iBooks, all 26 courses, was a part-time, one half-time former legal secretary. So all of this material, all 26 courses, so a 3-year LLB program, was done over the course of 8 months. So it is possible to do these things quite quickly without necessarily having a lot of staff. iTunes U is a very good system for managing all of this, but it is proprietary. It does mean that your students need to have an iPad or they have to have a Mac computer. So that's why we have iTunes U on one side and we have Moodle on the other. So the same content is in both sides. So depending on what computers students have, they can go either way. But I did mention earlier, we did give our students iPads so that they could utilise the iTunes U side of things. If we were doing this again, we would probably think about creating something like a MOOC environment, maybe edX or Coursera or one of those type of arrangements. But iTunes U is certainly feasible to do and manage, just as a learning management system was. And it didn't really cost us much apart from giving the students the iPads. All the course materials had to be developed by the academics. I just needed to impose, probably is the correct way to put it, impose some standards of what I was expecting in terms of layout to make sure that they had things in the same places. Not so much anything to do with the content, but the layout and having tutorial problems, having short answer and multiple choice questions as formative exercises within iBooks. Okay, moving on. I see Paul's joined us. Hello, Paul. I've included this chart because I just wanted to show you what the outreach has been for iTunes U. You can see on this chart two colours. There's a green colour and there is a blue colour. The blue colour, in pretty much all cases, extends along the graph far further than the green colour. The green colour is our actual students. The blue colour are other people who are subscribing to the courses. So what you see there in criminal law practice and procedure, we have about 400 students who've accessed that, but we have 3,200 other people who have subscribed to that course. So it does have a public outreach type situation. We're a public university, we're publicly funded. We take the view in our particular discipline that what we do is a public good and that it's out there for people to look at. So all of our materials there, all our lectures, all of our podcasts, everything, our notes, everything. The only thing that's not out there in the public is the Moodle discussion threads. And if we added that element to iTunes U, which we could do, we would effectively have a MOOC environment in all of our courses. So we'll continue to do this because we see it as I say, a public good. It does mean our academics have to get through the barrier of thinking or worrying that suddenly they're far more exposed to the world. You know, I was confronted initially with arguments, well, what if I defame somebody, if I make an horrendous mistake? The beauty of this is you can actually edit. You can edit the films. Now, I actually haven't had to edit anything for anybody. So it hasn't been an issue. And I've been teaching in these types of environments for nearly 25 years. Everything I have ever done at any university law school over that entire period has been recorded and sent out. So I suppose I don't see this as an issue anymore because I'm just so used to it. But if you're not used to it, it might be a bit confronting. But it really has never been a problem. No one has ever been sued. The roof hasn't fallen in. If, for argument's sake, somebody has sworn or done something they shouldn't have, then we can edit it out before we release it generally. So, you know, it really isn't a problem. But you will have those arguments with academics. Okay, what tools we use? So this is a question that was asked earlier. In terms of our learning management system, we use two of them, essentially iTunes U and Moodle. But, I mean, you can use Blackboard. I'm sure your universities, respective universities, have learning management systems. They're fairly similar in the way in which they work, and you can embed all of these things within them. So it's really, it doesn't matter what learning management system you use. In terms of repositories of all of our information, we use Google Docs. In terms of video conferencing, we use Zoom, which is what we're using at the moment. We also use Blackboard Collaborate. Blackboard Collaborate's quality of recordings is very poor. We find Zoom is a much better product. In terms of film production, so some of those introductions to particular topics, I've used Camtasia, TechSmith's Camtasia, to develop. It's basically a screen capture product. So, for example, if I had a series of PowerPoint slides, I could put the PowerPoint slides onto my computer and then I can capture those PowerPoint slides with Camtasia and I can do an audio overlay. Once that's been recorded, I can then strip out the audio, which then becomes a podcast. So it's very efficient. You produce a film which you can upload to YouTube. You can produce a set of PowerPoint slides which you can give to your student, and you can produce a podcast, and you do all of those things simultaneously. So it's a very efficient way of constructing and distributing the materials. They'll then be put on Moodle and onto iTunes U in our case. So Camtasia is an excellent product. It's not difficult to use. And all of our academic staff have, in our particular case, we use IMAX. We give them Camtasia and the other software that they need. And there's central university support in training in things like Camtasia. There is none in Zoom. We're ahead of our university with respect to Zoom, but it's fairly easy to use. So it has never been a real problem. In terms of distribution of films, we use YouTube. We could use the university's internal media server, but if you do that, you then encounter many layers of bureaucracy and it's not worth the hassle. So we tend to just use YouTube. Plus, we also get around the limitations of the university's marketing division, who insists they want to lock everything down, as they often do. So we actually market our particular discipline through YouTube, through our content. And you can see from iTunes U that that's been fairly effective in terms of having people look at our material. Mind you, we do take a lot of effort to make sure that our quality is good. So we tend to be left alone. Maybe we're in the too hard basket at the moment for our university, but we have a good relationship with marketing and they provide us with images and we provide them with films, all sorts of things. So it works out. In terms of animation, there's a lot more work involved in animation. The product that you saw poor old Stuart having to deal with Mrs. Monk and Mrs. Robertson, that was a product called Extra Normal. Now, Extra Normal went into insolvency, but it has now been resold, and I think the company is actually coming back. So if you have a look on the web for Extra Normal, you will start to see that they're going to be reselling that product again. That is an excellent product for producing very good quality animations. Very, very easy to use. Anybody could make one of those films. Having said that, because Extra Normal disappeared for a while, I had to look at other products for 2D animation, so things like South Park genre type things that I've done. I tend to use Crazy Talk Pro 2, pretty inexpensive product. A bit more of a learning curve. The other one I use is Anime Studio Pro. Once again, more of a learning curve. So that's on the 2D side. It does take a bit of effort. On the 3D side, apart from Extra Normal, the other product that I could recommend is iClone. Much steeper learning curve. So you really need to invest some time in learning that product. So I think generally for academics, it's best to start off with something simple. So I would suggest using just video cameras to start with. If you're interested in the animation, wait until Extra Normal comes back on and available, or play with 2D Crazy Talk. Very inexpensive products. In terms of branching structures, I have, as I said, my son has developed some software in relation to that, so if you're interested, I can make that available to you. It gets around any of the needs for you to use JavaScript. It's a flowchart type program, relatively easy to use. So that'll soon be available, and you can. It's very alphaware, I think you'd call it. It was developed 3 days ago, so but it works very well, very well. In terms of flashcards, which is another system, we have a product called FlashCram. So you can go to flashcram.com and you can develop flashcards for your students. You can have students develop their own cards, you can share packs, and you can also use that system for staged repetition, which is very important for retaining memories. One of the reasons I've been using flashcards is we found in our course, so once students did something like contract law in year 1, by the time they got to year 3, they'd forgotten everything they ever knew about contract law. So when you start trying to teach them civil procedure and you say, well, what are the elements of the contract that needs to be completed, you get vague expressions. And that really comes about because they tend to cram for exams, and cramming, while it can get you through an exam, doesn't build long-term memories. Flashcards combined with staged repetition can do that, and there's plenty of empirical evidence to support that. And if you're interested, I can supply you with links to all of that, and you can play around with FlashCram as well. The way I use it in my courses is that I get some of our academic staff are developing flashcards, such as in contract law, and also we get students to develop their own cards as a form of assessment. In terms of creation of documents, we use Microsoft Word, and we also use iBook Author, which is the free product which develops the iBooks for iTunes U. In terms of electronic marking or e-grading, we can use Remarks PDF, that's what I use. Other people, you can use Microsoft Word and just put in, comments. So I find my products much more seamless, but I won't go through a marketing skills. Okay, the last, I think this is the last slide. This is about accreditation, because I know this is certainly of interest to poor old Paul down the bottom there, who's facing this issue. And all of us have to comply with various accreditation issues. What I've included in this slide are the exact accreditation questions that were asked by our Legal Practitioners Admission Board. What you'll find with accreditation agencies generally is that often they have no conception of what online learning is. They will assume that it's second rate, and you have to go through a process of educating them. So the questions they ask are things like questions about the standard of lecture notes, presentation slides. Are they really comparable to what somebody who's doing a face-to-face degree that I did 20 years ago at the university? Is it like that? These sort of questions. How do students develop research, analysis, reasoning, problem-solving, communication skills? The only real one there that's challenging, I think, is the communication skills. because it relies on these sorts of technologies. But a lot of the other ones, it's just stock standard part of your law school curriculum. The sufficiency of online communication skills in terms of accessibility of lecturers and students. Again, it's lots of questions around just what sort of interactions can happen between students and students, students and staff, students and other people, be it community legal centres, clinical practice type situations, etc. All of these things can be managed and handled. And what I tend to find is once you show the accreditation agencies what you're doing, they tend to come around. They understand that what you're doing isn't second rate, that in fact it's quite a legitimate way of proceeding. You'll have less trouble where you've got mixed mode delivery, so where you have things like residential school, these mixed mode models, which is what you're looking at. And it's that much more removed when you're in a totally online environment that I'm in. So I have more challenges potentially than you would with accreditation agencies. But they can all be overcome. The other one that's interesting is about library. We don't have a physical library, and that's often confronting for accreditation agencies as well, even though all of the material is available electronically. And our library is an electronic library, which is how practitioners tend to operate. So anyway, you'll have those sorts of arguments. Okay, well, there it is. Look, that gives you an overview of studying law online, at least how we've interpreted it. Quite happy to answer any questions that you have. Quite amenable to having you have access to some of the flash card software we use, the branch repetition type software. And if you've got specific questions about animations, I'm quite keen on that area because I think it just adds another dimension to the course. It doesn't replace how you do your teaching. It's just another aspect or in your armory of techniques for using with students. All right, questions. You must have some questions, surely. I'd hope you'd have some questions, or you're all in a state of shock, perhaps. I don't know, but you can teach a law degree online. We've had our first graduates now. Our law degree is 3 years duration, and those graduates, we only had a very small number to begin with, about 15, I think, that all got jobs. So things are quite positive. A lot of those in regional areas where we were expecting them that they would go.
I have one question, Professor. You said that you thought Zoom was a lot better than Collaborate.
Yes.
With regard to recording, was that what you said?
Yeah, it's the quality of the recording, and it comes about because Blackboard Collaborate at the moment, when it produces this recording, it is using Flash. So what it does is it decreases substantially the quality of the recording, whereas Zoom will produce a crystal clear MP4 file, which is ideal for uploading to YouTube. And it's also a very, the MP4 is a very tight format, so the file size isn't large, whereas Blackboard Collaborate, the quality just wasn't good enough. I mean, Blackboard Collaborate does have positive features in terms of additional features that Zoom doesn't have. For example, you can have breakout groups, you can have people who can raise their hands, and all sorts of nice little features within it. But what we find is that our class sizes tend to be fairly small. I think the biggest one we've had has about 20 students in it. If you're conducting online classes, you don't want to have massive numbers of students. It just turns into a repeat of the massive lecture type approach that you're trying to avoid. So it's better to have small class sizes. And if somebody's got a question, you can see them. They can raise their hand and you can see that they've got a question. So it works. You don't need those extra features that Collaborate has. The quality of the recording is the main factor to me.
Yeah, the one thing that I noticed about Collaborate is that the viewing surface, I guess on Zoom it's called Prezi.
Well, no, it's not actually. What I'm doing, Prezi is a completely different piece of software.
Okay.
All I've done is I have screen shared Prezi. So I can actually stop that now. I'll stop the share. And we will now drop back into the normal presentation. So what we've got at the moment, I think, is a picture of Eric's office. So it's as viewed through the camera. So what I can do is I can actually screen share whatever I'm showing. So I could show you anything. I could show you a PowerPoint slide, a Prezi presentation, a film, whatever. So that's the idea. So don't know. It's not, Prezi is not part of Zoom. I've just made it.
Yeah, Blackboard has screen share also,
yeah,
and other features. But the thing that we were noticing with at least this presentation was that it was very difficult to read the material.
Okay, that may be more of a problem in terms of some of the screenshots that I've done. Right. If I why don't we try an experiment? Let's see if I can just bring up something here. So this is I'll just screen share this. Some of you might be familiar with this. Mm-hmm. So what does the quality of that look like on your screen?
Sure, that's very good. Yeah.
I think what you were seeing was a bit of an artifact of my showing it through Prezi rather than actually doing it in a much more live fashion. So if we were running a class, I could bring this slide up, and it might be a problem, or it might be a piece of legislation, and we can discuss that. But it is clear. So I'm sorry if I gave that impression because of the way I created it with Prezi. I just wanted to make sure that I had a presentation in case we had a failure of anything. So you can see that it's quite reasonable. Yeah. Okay. Other questions? Paul, have you got any questions? Came in a little bit late there, but did you have any particular questions you wanted to ask?
Not that I can think of, Stephen, as I've been through this a number of times with you. I think the one thing the audience needs to be aware of, which I mentioned in chat, is that in Australia, your regulators are very much focused on outcomes and much less on modes of delivery.
Yes, that's right. Actually,
which is refreshing because in Canada we're facing, in the U.S., William Mitchell certainly had to navigate its way around a variance under ABA 306. In Canada, if one wanted to do this sort of online instruction, we run dead onto a copy of ABA 306 in terms of modes of delivery.
Yeah. Actually, it was a good point you raised about chat. I didn't actually have my chat on. I wasn't looking. But you actually can have a chat channel running at the same time. So on the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can click on chat and it actually opens it up. And there's actually a few questions there, which I've seen a bit earlier. Normally I'd have this running with students, but sometimes students will put questions on chat that they don't actually want to raise in the video. So I should have had that running and kept an eye on it. So will the Prezi be posted? Yes, it'll actually be available through Prezi. So you can look at it there, and I can also put the film up on YouTube as well. Okay, all right. There's maybe some question. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, all right. Other questions? We all done? So I might ask you, I mean, how do you think an approach that I've just shown you would work in your law school in the US? Is this the sort of thing that you would consider, or do you have a different sort of plan in mind, or just curious? Or maybe you don't want to say on the video. No one wants to take that question.
Well, one reaction is that you have. I love the creativity that that you've shown in terms of finding tools. You have Moodle and iTunes U and Google Drive and Animation Extra Normal, among many other things. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if it's chaotic for teachers or for students to learn so many different approaches, or do you feel like that's been easy to
well,
manage?
I'll explain a few things. Firstly, the most important point is that it's the pedagogy that drives what you do, not the technology. So what I do is I think of the way, okay, I want to make an environment in my particular course that utilizes more flowcharts and images to make it a much more interesting experience. So I look around and say, okay, well, what tools are there that will help me do that? So I can use Camtasia to make a film. I can use animations to do that. And I look at the tools that are available. I also think, well, how can I make it more engaging for my students? What tools can they use? So I thought, should I ask my students to actually create an animation? I thought about that for a while. I thought it was just too much of an ask for my students to do that. So what I did is I compromised and I thought, okay, I will get them to write the script and the storyboard for the animation. So I set that as an assignment for them to do. So they could choose, in this particular case, an ethical issue of their choice. It didn't matter what the ethical issue was, as long as it was an ethical issue. And that they would then, in teams of 3, they'd self-select their team, they would develop the script for the animation. And my promise was that the best one of those I would animate. And I did, and distributed it to the students. So that was the type of assignment. It was outside their comfort zone because they'd never looked at a storyboard. They'd never written a script, so they had to become accustomed to doing that, which they did. And the results were very good. I've got an empirical study backing all of these things. Because everything we do, we actually run empirical studies on to see whether it's actually having the impacts that we anticipated that it would. Often it does, sometimes it doesn't. Flashcards was an example where they were delivered by the lecturer in contract law, they were a success. Where they were created by the students, we had the problem with students trying to come to grips with the software, and it wasn't as successful as it should have been. But we will learn from that, so the next time we do that, we'll provide more support, and then we'll run the study again to see if there's positive outcomes. So these things are coming out in journals. So we run action research projects as we go, just to see whether what we're doing is actually, empirically valid, is it repeatable, etc. So in terms of the software our students have to come to grips with, primarily they could do their course just by using the learning management system and watching the films. It's only the assessments on occasions will create some challenges for them. It's more challenging for our staff. Now, we have a small number of staff, so it's much easier for me to train them. So I do a lot of training. So if I come across or they come across a piece of software, we will analyse it. We will work out whether we can use it or whether we should be using it. Does it suit the pedagogy that we're trying to use with our students? And if it does, we will then do an experiment in one of our subjects to see how it goes. And then if it looks successful, we will then do training sessions with our staff. And remember, some of our staff are professionals. They're not actually academics. So I, for example, have our family law lecturer as a registrar in the family court. Also works, has also had long experience in law firms. Another one is a lawyer and runs a law firm. They are getting the same training on using YouTube, on using Zoom, and in the learning management system. And sure, there are hiccups, but they get the support from me and from the other academics. A lot of the systems we use aren't supported by the university because we're ahead of the university. Zoom is an example of that. But we're running all our classes using Zoom, and what I'm seeing now is that the other areas of the university are starting to use it. So it does catch on. If it's a good product and works, it does catch on in other areas. So there is training involved. Yeah, and you have to have academics that are interested in making the online course successful. It's very difficult if you've got an academic who is entrenched in a paradigm that only involves face-to-face lectures. You then have to go through a process of educating them and giving them the support they need to adapt to a different environment. But we've been able to do that, but we're doing it with small numbers of staff. How that would transpose into larger numbers of staff, I'd imagine you'll have more difficulty, but I don't see why it would be impossible. It ultimately comes down to how willing are your academic staff to actually produce a good quality product for their law school, because this is highly visible. It's out there. It's not hidden behind firewalls. It's not hidden behind a situation where you have to come on campus and be enrolled to see what's going on. It's visible. So it encourages people to do a better performance as well.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Any other questions? No? All right. Look, it's been a pleasure. You know, if you think of other questions, just email me. Quite happy to answer them, share anything that we do. I don't see it as competitors in any way. I'd rather something I've shown you that can help you with your program. If you've got some other specific questions you'd like to ask, I'm quite happy to help. I'd just like to see the general standard of legal education using some of these technologies improve. And I think we'll see that over time as academics become more comfortable with these sorts of approaches. All right, then, look, I might sign off and create this MP4 file, and then I'll upload it and it'll be distributed to you. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I'll just end the meeting now.